So on today's podcast, we're talking about the fact that cultures can turn around and going to be talking about the factors that help cultures change and become what they want them to be. Welcome back to the Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are, however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you are here. We're in season 9, which means we have 265 or something episodes at this point. So glad you're here. So glad you made it. If you're new to the podcast, welcome in. I hope you'll just Google my name. I mean, you can go through the list, obviously, on whatever platform you're listening to and check out all the episodes of those 265. You can also just Google my name, Jason Barger, and whatever topic you're looking for as it relates to leadership, culture, mindset, trust, communication, whatever that is for you, and you're going to find a lot of great episodes out there. You're also going to stumble upon some great conversations I've had with thought leaders from around the world, friends of mine, people that have just been excited to have and share on the podcast. So much great stuff out there that I hope you'll go back and check that out. And so glad you've made it here. If you're one of the OGs that have been with us from the very beginning of this podcast, then I'm so glad this continues to add value to your life and your work. And I still invite you to go back and listen to old episodes because they're as relevant today as they were when we recorded them. And just so glad that this continues to be a place for you to show up and add value to your life and your work. My commitment to listeners every single time that I record one of these is I want this topic, not only this time that we spend together, whether you're on a walk or commute or however you're listening to this, is we want this to be time for you to step back, for you to be, take a deep breath and think about your life, your work, and hopefully be filled with some ideas and some thoughts that breathe a little good oxygen into you and then help you think about that temperature that you're hoping to set in your life and your work. And we'll continue to do our best to try to show up and share good content with you. Before we dive into today's topic, if you'll do me the quick favor and rate the podcast 5 stars, on whatever platform you're using, that's super important. Continue being told to tell people that, but rate the podcast. If you'll review the podcast in your own words, that's super powerful, helps people find and see why in a very noisy, negative world, why listen to this. And then if you share the podcast, obviously every time you share it with friends, colleagues, on social media, whatever's, authentic for you, but if you share it with people and say, hey, let's listen to this episode and then let's talk about the questions, that's how this continues to grow and spread, and we're so grateful for everybody that does that. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed yet on whatever platform you're on, please do that, and we'll continue to do our best to keep bringing good stuff your way. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Culture shaping is not a drive-through experience. Many of you have heard me say this many different times, but that culture shaping is not a drive-through experience. We know that developing people and cultures takes time. We live in a fast food world. We live in an instantaneous world of communication. We live in a time where I know we want that kind of immediate gratification, but the reality is we know that developing people and culture takes time. It takes intentional effort to follow the process of leading change that we know from studying change theory. Again, I've talked about it on many podcasts before. You can, again, search this idea of the 6 A's of leading change. I've done a number of episodes about that. But we know from studying change theory, the way that we develop as individual people, let alone cultures, is that the change process all follows the same pattern. And I call it the 6 A's because I think it's easier for people to remember and wrap their heads around. But this change process that all follows the same pattern, it starts with these 6 A's, and to assess, to even understand where are you, what's going well, what's not going well. to then aligning yourself around your highest priorities and your core values, and aligning around concepts around, well, how do we want to lead, and what is the culture that we want? How do we define those things? And then aspire. Well, what is that we're trying to create in the future? What's that vision that we haven't created that we want to be different? And then how do we articulate it? How do we tell that story and describe it to people? Because if we can't describe it, we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And then how do we tie it to action? Not just a vision for what we want to create in the future, but what are we going to actually go do to create it? And then lastly, how we anchor it. And how we anchor it is how to, every single day, and especially across organizations, is how do we hire? How do we onboard? How do we train? How do we develop? How do we do performance evaluations? How do we continue to help become this kind of repeated beingness that you've heard me talk about in past podcasts around that culture that they're trying to create? So the 6 A's are part of that process of leading change for ourselves or for others. And we know that the best leaders, teams, and organizations and cultures practice what we talked about on that last podcast about repeated beingness. They have clarity on who they are aiming to be, the temperature that they're trying to set, and then have the consistency each day to breathe oxygen into their efforts and other people, so that others can show up with this kind of repeated beingness no matter what is happening around them. They control what they can control. And I could point to countless examples of great leaders and cultures, many who I've talked about on past podcasts, who are leading and creating compelling cultures that aren't perfect. No person and no organization and no culture is perfect, but they're succeeding by the culture they create with those around them and the mission that's really clear at the center of everything that they do. And some teams and organizations don't have the cultures they want. Some are failing. Some are struggling. Some are toxic and negative. And some are just kind of stuck where they are. And for these types of places, changing the culture can often, seem like or feel like a monumental lift. It seems overwhelming and so far off in the distant future that anything could change that they end up just staying stuck right where they are. And I understand why this happens, because it's difficult. It's hard to align people. It's hard to get clear on that we want. It's hard to then have the courage and the consistency and the discipline to shift our actions and behaviors. And so oftentimes in toxic or struggling or disgruntled places, it's easier to kind of stay where we are. However, cultures can turn around. Cultures can turn around. And we see it time and time again. But it takes the courage and intentionality to begin setting a different temperature. Today, I want to build upon this idea that cultures can turn around and share one glaring example right in front of us that's, recent and topical, that hopefully is inspiring to anyone who is struggling out there and wanting to their culture to change, or if you feel like your culture is going well or that it's terrific, hopefully it's inspiring for you to keep it going and continue to find new ways to breathe oxygen into it and continue to invest in that development of the culture. So on today's podcast, we're talking about the fact that cultures can turn around, and going to be talking about the factors that help cultures change and become what they want them to be. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon. Examples of cultures that can and did turn around are all around us. We know examples of business cultures that have gone from struggling to thriving. I bet everybody can picture them in their own mind. Personally, without naming names, I don't want to name names, but I've experienced, and in many of them that I've helped support the development of people and culture, I've experienced many cultures that were disgruntled, divided, unhealthy, or at best, just kind of stagnant and just really nothing compelling. But I've watched, I've experienced, I've been a part of moving those cultures 180 degrees in the other direction to healthy, thriving, and succeeding cultures. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but it often took years of intentionality to dive into the 6A process with their people and engaging all. That's the key, engaging all in getting clear on the new temperature they are committed to creating within their culture. It doesn't happen overnight, but the change does happen. Sports are another place that are obvious examples that play out right in front of our eyes. And I realize that not everyone is a sports fan, but sports for so many people, again, even if you aren't a huge fan, they become such great reminders to us because they often play out year after year right in front of our faces. They're right in front of us. These examples play out and they remind us of things we already know or remind us of things that we need to remember. And so even if you're not a sports fan, I still hope that the example that I'm about to share is relevant and challenges you to think about the culture you are engaged in and what the lessons might mean for you or your team or your organization or your family or however you're thinking about the context of this for today. The Washington Commanders, formerly known as the Washington Football Team, and before that, the Washington Redskins, before the name was changed, were once a very proud and successful organization. They were, located in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, and they're the 3-time Super Bowl winning franchise with 15 divisional titles and 5 conference championships in the National Football League. And at one point in the time, during the 70s and the 80s, and then a little bit into the late 80s and beginning of the 90s, they were one of the 5 most celebrated, successful, and revered organizations in sports. But in the late 1990s, when new ownership took over, everything seemed to begin to slide in the wrong direction. The last 25 plus years, the organization slid below mediocrity, losing seasons, irrelevance, coaching turnover after turnover, organizational scrutiny, backlash, and a lot of placing the blame on other people. They've had scandals. They've had all kinds of things. From 2020 to 2023, the organization went through formal investigations into the ownership and allegations around a toxic workplace culture. So to say the culture was in a rough place is an understatement. They needed a rebranding of the franchise and to go in the complete other direction. I've watched my brother, bless his heart, a dedicated Commanders fan for so many years, watch in misery at the ineptitude of this organization. It seemed miserable to me, but so admirable that he has hung in with them Sunday after Sunday and disappointment after disappointment. And fortunately, in 2023, new ownership took over. And now, in the 2024-25 season that we've just experienced, and as I record this, again, the season isn't over, so hopefully they continue to go. But they've had a miraculous run, and I'll tell you kind of where they are right now as at the time of me recording this. But they've had an amazing turnaround from where they've been. And as I'm recording this, they're now 12-5, and they won their first playoff game in 19 years, and now have made their way, again at the time I'm recording this, to the Final Four, the 4 teams left in the NFL. And very well, who knows, maybe they'll play for a Super Bowl. But regardless, if they win any more games this year, the turnaround is undeniable and amazing. And so you look at it and you say, what happened? How did it turn around? And how did it seemingly turn around so quickly? At first glance, people point to the new ownership, which, of course, they played a role. A fresh start, new ideas, new approaches. Then they point to the amazingly talented quarterback, Jaden Daniels, who's a rookie. You have to have the quarterback position right, in my opinion, if you're going to be successful in any way in the National Football League and pro football. And they clearly have gotten it right with this kid. He's so talented and he's wonderful. But those are the first two things that people name, and they're exactly right. But it's also not the full story. If it was as easy as just a new owner and a new quarterback, that might be, enough to change some of the things, but certainly not to the level that they are experiencing and the stories you're hearing about what's happening in the culture behind the scenes. So as you dive deeper into the culture that has now been created by head coach Dan Quinn and everybody throughout this new organization, you see a completely different vibe than what they experienced for 25 plus years. In their words about what changed in a recent article, they quickly said, talent, culture, and people. What changed? Talent, culture, and people. They decided a new standard was going to be set, a new temperature they were committed to. They brought in veteran players who were committed to helping uphold these standards and help lead others along the way. The coach has been applauded for his ability to build authentic relationships with everyone throughout the organization, not even just the players, everyone throughout the organization. And he gets applauded for the alignment, the clarity on the vision, and the role that everybody plays in helping to create it. He's been applauded for hiring and empowering assistant coaches to also take ownership over the culture and speak up in team meetings with the players, that he wasn't going to be the only one talking, that he was empowering other leaders throughout the organizations to bring their mind and their heart and participate in the creation of this culture. They've intentionally sought ways to have fun and build connections together that they never used to do in the past of the organization. And each day, they've pulled in the same direction across the organization to create and set a new temperature for their culture. And guess what? The results have followed, not the other way around. The results have followed. It didn't magically happen. It didn't happen overnight, even though it's been quick. But it did remind us again that cultures can turn around. The best cultures have leaders and people and owners who are aligned on the culture they are trying to create and then breathe oxygen into themselves and everyone around them every single day. They go to work to create not just what they do, but how they do it and the culture they're hoping to create. And so as I record these, I'm always thinking about my hope for myself. My hope for myself and anyone listening is that we challenge ourselves as we see these and are reminded by these stories that are right in front of us to think about how are we committed to creating the life and the cultures and the relationships that we want in our life and our work. And remind ourselves that cultures can turn around. And even if you're experiencing what you would call a good or even great culture, it doesn't mean it'll magically stay there. We have to continue to invest, align, engage in the creation of what we want for tomorrow. We've got to breathe oxygen into ourselves and to the people around us in order to set that temperature that we want for the future. So as always, I'll leave you with some questions to ponder. How would you describe your current culture and whoever you're thinking about as you listen to this? What do you hope to improve or strengthen in your culture in the year ahead? And what intentional efforts related to talent, culture, and people will you make? What are the investments that you'll make? So good luck with your personal vision for your life, for your team, your organization, however you're coming to the podcast today. And again, if help and support to developing leaders and people and culture and alignment and developing skills around how we communicate and how we find this clarity or the 6 A's, how we lead the kind of change we want. If any of that is helpful to you, please track us down through the website, jasonvbarger.com. You can email us, info@jasonvbarger.com, or you can track us down on social media at jasonvbarger.com, and we'll continue to try to not only create content to help support you, but may more formally help support and partner with your team, your organization to help lead those changes and that development that you have for the future. So remember that calibrating our own thermostats, our own personal thermostats, let alone the temperature across our teams and organizations, is not a drive-through experience. It takes time. It takes intentionality. And then courage to kind of show up and breathe oxygen into ourselves and others along the way. So I hope you'll keep tuning into this podcast. Again, I hope you'll go back and Google my name and whatever topic you're looking for. Check out the 265 episodes. I hope you'll subscribe, rate, review, share episodes that resonate with you, with the people in your life and your work, and continue to engage in this kind of dialogue around developing people and culture. And that intentionality will lead to greater things. So cheers to you and cheers to everybody on the road ahead. And remember that the best leaders, teams, and organizations, the best cultures on the planet, they recalibrate their thermostat. They work on it. They invest in it. They continue to come back to it together. So step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.